I'm going to make this plaid cutting board out of walnut, cherry, ash, and padauk. I'm going to start by cutting this 12-quarter ash. I'm going to make two identical cutting boards, so I'm cutting enough wood to make two, and the boards are going to be 20 inches by 15 inches and about 1.5 inches thick. I'm rough cutting these pieces, and I want the final squares to be about 1 5/8 inches, so I'm cutting these to be almost 2 inches wide. That leaves me enough material for the jointing and planing. Starting with the ash. Next, I'll cut the walnut. And now I'm cutting the padauk. Now I'm cutting the cherry, and this is a piece of cherry that I purchased from an estate sale more than 5 years ago, and unfortunately it has a crack running all the way down the center, so this is perfect because I can cut 2 inches off each side. Fortunately, I noticed that there were some staples in the end of the wood before I cut into it. Next, I'm making two of the sides flat and straight and squaring up one of the corners. Now I'm planing the pieces to the final dimension, and it's important to plane all of the pieces at the same time so that they all have the same dimension. And I have my little friend Leo over today, and he's a big help. I'm not making them square at this point because after the first glue up I have to sand the piece, so I'm making them a little bit taller than they are wide. And now I'm cutting the pieces of wood to the appropriate length. And I have a stop block set up, so it's really quick to cut these because I don't have to measure each time. I'm going to glue up two sets of squares. The first set is walnut and padauk, and the other set is ash and cherry. It looks like I'm gluing everything together here into a single piece, but there's no glue in the center, so I'm just using a single set of clamps to glue up the two blocks. I'll clamp down a 2x4 on one edge to provide a little bit of vertical clamping force to get the board as flat as I can. After the first glue up has dried, I can run the pieces through the drum sander. I'll use my crosscut sled to trim the ends of each of the pieces. Now, I want the final board thickness to be about 1.5 inches, maybe slightly less. So I'm cutting these to be 1 5/8 inches because I have 3 more glue ups to come. So there's quite a bit of sanding that has to be done, and that's going to reduce the thickness each time. When making a plaid pattern like this, it's really important to try to keep everything lined up, kind of like making a chessboard. So I've got a 2x4 in between the two pieces and 2x4s on each of the outer edges so that when I clamp them, the edges will be as straight as possible. While the boards are gluing up, I want to create some end grain walnut and some end grain ash. It's definitely extra work to make these end grain strips, but it's worth it because that way all of the wood will expand and contract at the same rate. And now while the glue in those pieces is curing, I can sand the board. It's interesting to see all the layers of colored sawdust from all of the planing that I did from the different wood types. Now these squares are about 1 21/32 of an inch wide, and that's too hard for me to divide in half. So I'm switching over to metric. It's 42 millimeters, so I'm dividing them in half at 21 millimeters. And then I'll just run the center of the blade through the line that I marked. Now I'll cut the end grain strips of the ash and walnut. And then I'll sand them to be 1/8 of an inch thick. The sandpaper was getting clogged with all the sawdust, so I'm just taking a quick break to clean it up. Next, I'm going to cut from side to side. Again, I'm measuring 21 millimeters for each center point. That was the final glue up, and this is the final time through the drum sander. Next, I'll do some hand sanding to remove the scratch marks from the drum sander. I'll trim the edges and square it up, and then it's time to cut the juice groove on the CNC. I used to cut these juice grooves by hand, but I always had problems at the corners because I would get burn marks from the router bit. The CNC does it very precisely and everything goes at the same speed, so there are no burn marks. And everything is lined up perfectly. Next, I'll just round the corners a little bit. And I put a 15-degree bevel at each end to make it easier to pick up the board. And then I'll use a 1/4 inch roundover bit. I'll clean everything up with a hand sander, and I will also round over the bottom edge of the bevel that the roundover bit was not able to reach. And finally, I'll apply some mineral oil, and it's done. So I gotta ask, would you make it?